And so there's a lot of factors, and people don't always get it right on the first try, sometimes even the second try. And so I think the thing that's important is it's okay to switch that up. I tell families all the time, if somebody's not, it has to be a good fit for both caregiver and family. So if it's not a good fit for both, it's okay to switch it up and interview or try somebody different. Hello, my name is Amy Nat, and I am the CEO of Aging Outreach Services. Welcome to All Things Aging.
And I'm Amy Opes, editor of Outreach NC, our monthly publication. And today we're talking about how to actually find a good caregiver fit.
Yes.
So one of the things that you specialize in is help connect people who need care with people who can provide care.
Correct.
And one of the biggest questions that people have is, yes, I can find caregivers, but how do I find a good fit that will be sustainable and will last? And
right, there's a lot of aspects to it that people don't think about until they need it.
So, number one.
Yes.
How do you know when it's time to introduce a caregiver?
So I typically will tell families, if you're asking me if it's time to introduce a caregiver, then it's probably time to introduce a caregiver. A lot of times people will wait until they're in a crisis or until something, somebody has a fall or something happens, you go to visit mom or dad and you notice there's some issues going on. And then they'll bring a caregiver in when things are sort of, again, in that crisis situation, things are a little bit unsettled. So usually people will have more success if they look at introducing a caregiver before their family member is in crisis and before their needs have escalated to a point that it's really gotten beyond what they can manage at home. The caregiver then can sort of slowly work into building a relationship with that person versus coming directly in and having more complex care needs to take care of.
And so if you're going to do that, would you need to look for a caregiver who has multiple levels of care?
Yeah, a lot of times, what you're trying to do is find somebody, one, that's a good personality match, but also that what they offer is congruent with what the person needs. And so sometimes, and what we see happen a lot, is somebody will start with one caregiver who maybe is kind of a companion, right? We see this a lot with somebody, has somebody who's coming in to help with cleaning and they sort of transition into that role of caregiver. But if the individual needing care progresses to a point where they need more what we would call activities of daily living or personal care, then you may need a caregiver who has that skill set. And so it could be that the caregiver you start with is the caregiver that can kind of grow with you, but it also may be that as that person's needs increase, it's really a different type of caregiver that you need to bring in.
And so starting earlier helps you sort of adjust to even having somebody in the home and providing any level of care.
Right, because if you can have somebody coming in one day a week for 3 or 4 hours and maybe you're still able to go to lunch or go do some activities and build a relationship, that's much easier than starting with 24-hour care and having somebody in your house and in your space all of the time. Yeah.
What are the different models of home care delivery?
Right, so it's one of those things that people don't really think about, again, until they're in a situation where they need care. But if you think about it, so a lot of it is driven by payer source. And so if you think about a traditional home health agency, a lot of times that is something that is licensed through the state. Those caregivers a lot of times have to have a certain level of skill in order to work for them. A lot of times it's driven by insurance, right? So like Medicare, if somebody qualifies, maybe they had a fall or they've just come out of the hospital, they're managing a new diagnosis, there may be something that they qualify for under home health where their insurance or Medicare may temporarily sort of help with that cost. And in those cases, you might need a physician's order to get that care. We call that sort of agency-directed care. But then there's also this whole world of private duty care, and we call that more consumer-directed care. And so that's a lot of times if people are in their home and they don't really have a skilled home health need, or maybe they don't qualify for anything in sort of that realm of care, they may just be looking for a private duty caregiver in the community that can come in.
Right.
Okay, so in the private duty world, there are also different resources to identify caregivers. And so some people will ask a neighbor, ask a friend, ask at church. Some people will maybe go online to social media platforms and ask about, how do I find a private caregiver? And then what we do, there are also what they call caregiver registries. And so the function of the caregiver registry is to recruit these private duty caregivers, but to vet them, background check them, follow up on any skills that they claim to have, make sure they have professional liability insurance to protect them as well as the client, help to manage the payment from the caregiver to the client. And so it takes a lot of what sometimes becomes a liability to families when they're just dealing with somebody privately. So there are a lot of different ways that people will find private duty care or consumer directed care. And then there are also resources for people who are looking for more of home health care that's more the traditional medical insurance driven model as well.
So probably one of the biggest questions is, how much is it going to cost and how am I going to pay for it?
Yeah, who's going to pay for it? So there's this huge myth about, I have Medicare and Medicare is going to pay for it, but Medicare is really intended for sort of short-term acute medical. So it may be a bath aide coming into the home for a few weeks post-surgery. It may be a nurse coming out if you've been in a medical setting or have a new diagnosis that qualifies you. But the majority of the time, it's actually an out-of-pocket expense if somebody is living at home and they're looking at bringing in a caregiver. And so regardless kind of what model or resource you use to find that care, you're typically looking between $20 and $30 an hour to bring that person in. And so most of the time that's going to be an out-of-pocket expense, or some people will have long-term care insurance policies, and sometimes those have a home health benefit that can be used, whether it's an independent provider or a private duty care provider, or like a CNA or a care provider coming through an agency.
How do you see people paying for it if they do need 3 months of in-home care? What are they using?
It's hard. A lot of people don't expect that. It's one of those unexpected healthcare costs. And so they're really then looking at, okay, well, what is my nest egg that I've saved for retirement? How long is it realistic for me to be at home? If I look at needing 4 hours a day, that's maybe manageable versus 12 hours a day, 24 hours a day is when a lot of people then look at having to leave the home and going into a care setting. But that's where doing that financial planning and really looking at, what are my costs going to be as I age, and factoring in, if I do need care at home, how is that going to be paid for? What is that going to cost me?
So I was in the dentist recently, and I also have a friend who just went through an adoption, and both of those offer like kind of credit plans where you can use a credit plan to pay for whatever. Is there anything
maybe
like
we
that
should develop that?
I know. Okay.
No.
Anything like that?
No, there's not like care credit to be able. I mean, some people will take a reverse mortgage on their home or tap into savings or retirement accounts to fund the care that they need, or again, if they have a long-term care policy. Okay. But right, it's kind of part of that planning that you need to do for retirement when you're planning for other medical and care costs. And even if you do decide to move to a facility, there are times that caregivers are needed in those settings to supplement if there's especially behavioral issues, but those cost as well. And so it's sort of that whole nest egg when people are planning for retirement.
What if I don't know what I need and or I don't know what my parent needs?
Right. We get that question a lot. I don't know what I need. I don't know if they can do. A lot of times, a lot of companies will offer sort of an evaluation. So if you call me and you don't know what your mom needs, and okay, let me go to the home and meet with her. And it's really going through looking at those ADLs, which are like the bathing, dressing, ability to feed yourself. How do they ambulate? Do they need help transferring? So you're looking at those that need maybe a more skilled, experienced need, and what they call the instrumental activities of daily living, or IADLs. How are they paying their bills? Can they answer the phone? Can they cook? Or do they still drive? Are they able to manage kind of those household tasks? And so once you can kind of go through those checklists and look at, okay, well, what are they really able to do? Maybe they just need a little support to do it correctly. Or maybe it's something where it's become they really can't safely ambulate on their own. They really can't shower without somebody there because they're a big fall risk. And so once you can kind of go through those different aspects of what type of care they need, then it becomes a lot easier to know what type of caregiver you need, and maybe what type of schedule, even how many hours would that person need to be in the home, and then what would those tasks be. But there's definitely some kind of evaluation, and most families don't know.
Well, and I assume that with a professional helping you evaluate, they can say right now they need this, in 6 months they might need this, so we need to look at
it's a continuous progressive kind of process typically. And that's where if you're starting out with hey, my mom just needs a ride, to someplace, someone to help her grocery shop, carry the bags and put the things away. That's sometimes a much easier point of entry than having, again, somebody in your personal space helping with personal care.
How do you go about finding a good match? So, like you said, this is somebody in your personal space.
Yes, this is somebody in your personal space. And so certainly skill is one of it, right? So if you're talking to different care providers, you're not only asking things like, how far are they having to drive to get to your house? Because if there's someone who's commuting from quite a ways away, that could be an issue if there's bad weather or traffic or things like that come up. So maybe kind of logistics of where that person is, where they're coming from, but also the things like, do they work with pets? Do they work with smokers? Are they comfortable with personal care? Do they have experience with working with people with cognitive issues? And so you really have to factor in all those different things. Pets is a huge thing. Some people are very comfortable working with pets, but other people have allergies or they don't like dogs. And so you're really looking at not only all those kind of objective criteria, but then you factor in the subjective things. Personality, do they talk a lot? Do they not talk enough? Are they comfortable maybe going out on a walk in the neighborhood? Are they comfortable driving another person? What's their basic personality? When you say cooking, do you mean northern cooking, southern cooking? There's a big difference in those things, and so there's a lot of factors, and people don't always get it right on the first try, sometimes even the second try. And so I think the thing that's important is it's okay to switch that up. I tell families all the time, if somebody's not, it has to be a good fit for both caregiver and family. So if it's not a good fit for both, it's okay to switch it up and interview or try somebody different. And I would recommend that because you want it to be a good fit. You want this to be something that's going to be successful.
Can caregivers go into any setting, or is it just the home?
So, so caregivers can go into any setting. Now, if it gets to where it's like a skilled nursing setting, they have different regulations that they have to follow. So like maybe a companion could come in to sit with mom while she eats or take her out for a walk, but they wouldn't want them doing personal care because that's something the facility is responsible and liable for. But we get a lot of calls that maybe a parent is in assisted living and having some behavioral issues, or maybe it's even that they're just kind of down and they need someone to kind of spend some one-on-one time with them. And so in those settings, certainly people supplement with private duty caregivers as well as the care provided in that facility setting. And then in other scenarios, it's definitely the caregiver coming into the home, or even into maybe you've moved a parent in with you, and it's your home, but you're going to work, and you need somebody in there during the day to supplement. So there's a lot of different settings that people can utilize care to kind of supplement and stabilize the situation.
What are some things we should avoid when bringing a caregiver into the home?
So it's always, I always say go with your gut. Like, you need to be comfortable and you need to have a good feeling that person is in your home. There's definitely some safety security things. You don't want to get on Craigslist and find a caregiver, right? You want to make sure this person, you've done some type of background check to know who this person is coming into your home. It's a good idea if that person's going to be coming in your home to talk to your homeowner's insurance. Sometimes there's supplemental riders or policies you can add an extra layer of protection in case something happens while they're in the home. Same with driving the car, right? You want to make sure if they're going to be driving mom or dad's car, talk to the auto policy holder. There's a lot of kind of safety things that you can put in place, again, to make it successful. And then I tell families and individuals all the time, don't set yourself up to have a scenario where you're leaving things of great value that could not be replaced sitting out in the home. We all want to trust everyone and think everyone has good intentions, but the reality is sometimes people fall on hard times. And so it's always smart to lock things up. Maybe even prescription medications, controlled substances, sometimes we'll put in a lockbox. But yeah, if there's valuables and jewels and cash and checkbooks, have those things in a secured area just so it sets, again, up for success for everybody.
And then there's no question regardless.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not the caregiver at all. It's maybe mom has dementia and she's hiding things, right? She took her diamond ring and she wrapped it in a sock and she put it in a Kleenex box in the back of a drawer. But when the family comes in, they just know that diamond ring is missing. And so it's really important to protect the caregiver and to protect yourself and your family, just decide, to do some precautionary things before that person comes into your house.
When is in-home care not a great idea? When's it a bad idea?
Usually it's a safety issue, right? I always think back to, so if somebody has real behavioral issues where they're aggressive or violent, or if you can't afford 24-hour care, but the person really isn't safe at home, they're turning on a stove, they're wandering, they're doing things that are really, really creating a safety risk for themselves and for the person coming in, that's when sometimes it's much better to move that person to an environment where they're in a setting where there are staff 24 hours. The same can be true for people who are really isolated, right?
Oh, yeah.
Some people just don't do well with people coming into their space, and we find that they do better going into a facility setting or community care setting where there's activities and meals, but they can still go back to their own room.
Right.
And so sometimes for those people, that connection and that socialization really adds to their quality of life, where it sounded great to leave them at home and bring in a caregiver, but it might not have been the best solution. So usually that connection, and then again, when it's a safety issue.
How can somebody set up their home to accommodate having a caregiver coming in?
Yeah, so one of the number one complaints that people have when people are in their home is, I feel like there's somebody in my space all the time. I just want to be alone in my own kitchen and drink a cup of coffee. And so setting up a separate space for that caregiver where they have a place to go, and then having maybe a monitor so they can still hear or see what's going on in the other room in case the person that they're caring for needs something. But having sort of spaces set up in that environment where each person has a place to go if they just want some downtime and alone time is important.
That's probably important for both.
It's important for both people, for sure. Yep.
This one's big. What if my loved one is resistant to care?
Right. So I think our natural human nature when we're sort of battening down the hatches and trying to regain control of our life, which a lot of times when you're aging, there's things that are out of your control. And so when somebody introduces something or somebody new, we tend to sort of go, nope, I don't need that, I don't want that. And so again, a lot of times people are resistant, but you look for the opportunities to introduce somebody in small ways. Maybe your dad's resistant to care, but he's been told he can no longer drive and he really wants to still do his own grocery shopping. So here's my opportunity to say, let me empower you to do that. So you sort of look for that opportunity where there's maybe one need that you could use a caregiver to help fill. The other thing that I tell families a lot is if you wait too long and have a fall, you risk losing that independence and ability maybe of staying in your home is what you want to do. And so by allowing somebody to come in and help with even some of the smaller stuff at first, you're really enabling yourself to maintain your independence. And so sometimes if you can just shift the way that somebody's looking at it, and hey, if I let somebody come in and help, take over the yard work, take over the housekeeping, make sure I'm getting good meals, then maybe I'm going to maintain my independence longer and be able to stay in my home if that's what's important to me.
And I imagine, like you said, to do this earlier, because when you're in a crisis, I can imagine that feels like one more thing.
Yeah, and when you're in a crisis, you don't really get to interview and pick and match, and you're just taking who you can get at the moment to come in, and then you're sort of in that routine and people don't want to make a change. So the earlier you start to think about that, really the better, and it can't always happen that way. Sometimes it is happening in a crisis, and that's something we pull together all the time and can happen. But if you have time to sort of introduce things slowly, then that typically has a better success. You need the buy-in from the person who's receiving the care. It makes a big difference.
What about if I'm getting care for like my mom and I don't live in the home, or I live out of state? How can I monitor what's going on and ensure safety and happiness?
So we get a lot of questions about cameras in the home, and a lot of families do that, but obviously you would want to disclose that to the people in the home. And secondly, you would want to make sure you're not in somebody's private space, right? Their bathroom, or they change clothes in the bedroom or whatnot. So a lot of times adult children have that concern, but there's also there's a lot of technology now. That's the upside of technology. So there are some kind of monitoring devices. There's fall detection devices. There are things that will track somebody's patterns to where we know every day this is a routine in the home and there hasn't been any movement, and it's 10 a.m. and usually there's movement between. So there are different things between actual person in their caring and technology that can help somebody monitor from out of state. And that's also where Care management is the other side of what we do, but that's also where having somebody, if you're out of state, having somebody who's there and an advocate checking in at maybe unannounced times, stopping by the house. It's important to have somebody there who's also helping to monitor.
Yeah. And especially somebody who sees it every day so they can notice when something.
Yeah, you're looking for little things and
Right.
that might be off, or I don't know, food in the fridge that's gone bad, bills stacking up, just different things you start to notice. So,
All right, any final tips for success?
It's just you have to have an open mind. Getting older is not easy for most people, and again, having people in your space and accepting that you need help can be a very difficult thing for any of us. And so it's having the conversations, validating maybe how the person feels about it, why they're resistant, and then again, trying some different things that give them some buy-in to the process, letting them meet a couple different caregivers so that they can select who they feel is a good fit, because sometimes who I think might be a perfect fit for my dad isn't the person that my dad has any interest in having in his home. And families are surprised sometimes the bonds that form. And so I think keeping an open mind, letting that person be a part of the process, and being willing to sort of change as things evolve.
Good tips.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you.